What if the childhood you thought you left behind didn't actually disappear, but simply disguised itself as your adult personality?
Hmm.
I mean, think about that for a second. You walk around making decisions, forming relationships, dealing with stress at work, and you just assume you're acting as a fully formed, independent adult.
Right.
But what if the 3-year-old version of you is still in there, just quietly pulling the levers?
It is, it's a slightly unsettling thought when you really sit with it.
Yeah, a little bit.
Because we structure our whole society around the idea that we outgrow our early years.
Yeah.
You turn 18, you are an adult, case closed.
Boom, you're done.
Exactly.
Oh.
But mapping the actual architecture of the human mind reveals that the past is never really past. It
Yeah.
doesn't fade away. It finds, well, entirely new ways to express itself in your daily life.
And that invisible architecture is exactly what we're exploring today. We're looking at a truly fascinating speculative manuscript. It's titled The Persistence of Early Life.
Yeah, it's a great piece.
It was written by the authors Max and Claude in the imagined late-career voice of the legendary psychoanalyst Anna Freud, which is just a brilliant way to frame the science of human development.
It really is. It gives it such a compelling voice.
So our mission for this deep dive is to track how these early experiences survive decades of aging, how we actually inherit the psychological quirks of our parents, and how we navigate the massive, often unspoken mental challenges of getting older.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this because to understand any of it, we have to start by busting a massive myth about how human memory and childhood actually function.
Right, the whole sediment idea.
Yeah, we tend to view the past as a pile of dirt.
The geological strata metaphor, it's probably the most common misconception in popular psychology.
Like layers of rock.
Exactly. We imagine that our early childhood forms this bottom layer of sediment in our psyche. And as we grow, the rest of our life just piles on top of it layer by layer.
Burying that original 3-year-old self under decades of new experiences?
Right. But the problem with comparing your mind to sediment is that sediment is inert. It just sits there doing nothing.
Okay, so what is it then?
Well, the residues of your early life are living, breathing structures. They develop, they transform, and they are constantly actively interpreting your present reality.
Oh, wow. So it isn't just a buried fossil. It is something actively chewing on the present moment. So how does the manuscript categorize these living pieces of the past?
It breaks them down into 3 distinct types of residue. So first, you have structural residues.
Structural.
Think of this as the basic scaffolding of your personality. It dictates your go-to defense mechanisms.
So like if you tend to intellectualize your feelings when you're overwhelmed?
Yes, or if you withdraw completely. That's a structural habit formed very early on. Then second, you have dynamic residues.
Which are what exactly?
These are the specific unconscious wishes, unresolved conflicts, or specific anxieties from childhood that occasionally, bubble up to the surface.
Like random fears that pop up out of nowhere.
Right. But the third category is the one that arguably dictates your entire life path. And those are developmental residues.
That sounds much broader than just a bad memory or a coping mechanism.
Oh, it is much broader. A developmental residue isn't a specific memory at all. It is the absolute form, the invisible template of how you experience existence.
The template.
Yeah, it's the fundamental capacity you either developed or failed to develop to handle frustration, intimacy, loss, and change.
Okay, that makes sense.
The manuscript illustrates this beautifully with a clinical case study of a patient named Peter. So, at age 3, during the London Blitz in World War II, Peter's family home was destroyed.
Oh, man.
Yeah. He was separated from his mother and placed in a nursery.
That is an unimaginable level of trauma for a toddler.
Right. And initially his distress was extreme. But then a very curious thing happened.
What?
He seemed to settle in. He adapted. When he was eventually reunited with his mother after the immediate danger passed, he recovered remarkably quickly.
Wait, really? Just like that?
Yeah, he attached to her again. He played normally with other children. And the nursery staff actually wrote him up as a massive success story.
Like he was just this highly resilient child who bounced back.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing the bounce back was an illusion. Because you don't just walk away from losing your mother in a war zone at age 3 without some kind of psychological scar.
No, you don't. And the thing is, the specific memory of the bombing wasn't repressed. Peter grew up knowing it happened.
So he remembered it.
Yes. But what the adults around him couldn't see was the template for managing human attachment that he had laid down in that nursery.
Ah, the developmental residue.
Exactly. For that 3-year-old brain, The pain of losing his mother was so completely overwhelming that his developing mind created a brutal survival tactic: preemptive detachment.
Wow, preemptive detachment.
The logic is simple, really. If you don't actually need anyone, you cannot be devastated when they inevitably disappear.
So he just, like, turned off the emotional dependency valve?
He had to, in order to survive the nursery. But fast forward to age 11, Peter abruptly starts cutting off his closest friends and his absolute favorite teachers.
Just out of nowhere.
No warning, no argument,
Yeah.
just total cold withdrawal from anyone he was getting close to.
Oh, wow.
And then we see him at 34 years old. He is sitting in a psychoanalyst office because his wife is threatening to leave him.
Because he's doing the same thing.
Yes, whenever they experience a moment of genuine, vulnerable intimacy, he completely retreats into this fortress of cold self-sufficiency.
It's like childhood isn't a file saved on a hard drive that you can just open or delete. It's the operating system itself running quietly in the background.
That is a perfect way to put it.
That 3-year-old survival tactic literally became the 34-year-old's relationship killer.
Exactly.
But wait, if our operating system is hardwired at age 3, how do we ever grow? I mean, I thought the whole point of getting older was developing new ways to cope.
Yeah.
We're just doomed to run infantile software forever.
Well, the catch is, our conventional model of how humans grow up completely breaks down once we hit adulthood.
What do you mean?
What's fascinating here is the stark contrast between childhood development and adult development. In childhood, growth is almost entirely linear.
Linear, like a straight line.
Right. It operates as a straight line, moving from the total dependency of infancy to the absolute independence of a young adult.
So you acquire a new, more complex skill and you completely abandon the old one.
Exactly. You learn to run, so you stop crawling. You learn to speak in full sentences, so you stop babbling. It's a progressive march forward.
Okay, so that linear model works perfectly for kids.
It does.
Yeah.
But healthy adult development isn't linear. It is curvilinear. It curves back on itself.
It curves back.
Yeah. For an adult, growth doesn't mean moving further and further away from the traits of your childhood. It actually requires circling back and recovering the very things you had to mercilessly surrender in order to become a functioning, independent teenager.
So you recover them, but like in a newly transformed way?
Yes.
I'm struggling to see how going backwards is a sign of maturity. Usually, if an adult starts acting like a toddler, we call that a breakdown.
Fair point. Let's apply it to the concept of dependency. The linear path demands that you go from a dependent infant to a completely self-sufficient adult.
Right.
But a hyper-independent adult who refuses to rely on absolutely anyone isn't healthy. That is Peter, sitting in the analyst's office with his marriage falling apart.
Oh, I see.
The truly healthy adult curves back and recovers that early dependency, but transforms it into mature intimacy. You consciously allow yourself to depend on a partner.
Fully knowing you possess the skills to survive without them.
Exactly. You choose vulnerability anyway.
So it's the difference between needing someone because you literally cannot feed yourself and needing someone because you are choosing to share your life with them.
Spot on. Play is another perfect example. A toddler plays with total unselfconscious immersion.
Just pure chaos and fun.
Right. But a school-age child is forced to surrender that wild free play in order to learn social rules, reality testing, and how to sit still in a classroom.
Which is necessary.
It is.
Yeah.
But the fully realized adult circles back. They recover that unselfconscious play, transforming it into adult creativity, deep artistic expression, or a sophisticated sense of humor.
That makes a lot of sense. But I want to push back on the mechanics of this a little bit. How do we distinguish between an adult who is engaging in this healthy curvilinear growth and an adult who is just fundamentally regressing under stress?
It's a crucial distinction. And it comes entirely down to who is in the driver's seat.
Who's in the driver's seat?
Yeah. In pathological regression, your rational mind is overwhelmed. You are dragged backward against your will by stress or trauma. Think of an adult having a screaming meltdown in traffic.
Okay, yeah, that's not healthy.
No, but in healthy development, your adult ego initiates the return. You visit the past, you access those raw emotional states without taking up permanent residence there.
Oh, it's voluntary tourism rather than a forced relocation.
I like that, yes. And one of the most profound everyday examples of this voluntary return is the transition into parenthood.
Really? How so?
Well, when a mother is caring for a newborn infant, she simply cannot rely on her adult, rational logic to get the job done. A baby doesn't understand reason.
You can't debate a crying newborn.
Exactly.
Mm.
To figure out what this helpless creature needs, the mother must temporarily suspend her logical mind and drop into a highly intuitive, pre-verbal, almost entirely emotional state.
She has to meet the baby on the baby's raw, instinctual wavelength.
Right. And subjectively to that new mother, this experience can feel like a massive, terrifying regression.
Like she's losing her mind a little bit.
Yes, she might feel like she is completely unmoored from the highly capable, logical professional she was just a month ago.
Wow.
But psychologically, the willingness to relinquish her adult self-sufficiency to meet that infant's needs is a towering developmental achievement. She's driving the car back to the old neighborhood on purpose.
That is a remarkably validating way to reframe the pure chaos of new parenthood. It's not a loss of your adult identity, it's a necessary feature of the software required to keep a human infant alive.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, though, how the baby experiences that mother who is essentially returning to a raw emotional state to connect with them.
That perspective shift is vital. Because the baby isn't just a passive sponge.
Right.
We often fall into the trap of believing that children simply absorb their parents' neuroses or traumas perfectly intact. But children are highly active interpreters.
They filter it.
Yes, they filter whatever the parent is putting out through the incredibly narrow lens of their own developmental stage.
Right, because they don't have the context to understand adult problems.
Precisely. If a mother's suffering from deep clinical depression, a 3-year-old lacks the cognitive architecture to think, oh, my mother is struggling with a neurochemical imbalance.
Yeah, a toddler isn't thinking that.
No. The 3-year-old's brain operates entirely on self-reference. So the child concludes, my mother is withdrawing her love because I am fundamentally bad.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
It is. The child constructs their own unique psychic reality based purely on their own cognitive limits. And that misinterpretation becomes their new lifelong template.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because the manuscript introduces this concept next that completely blew my mind. It's called the developmental echo.
Ah, yes. It is easily one of the most powerful insights in the text.
Can you explain it?
Sure. A developmental echo happens when a parent is struck by a sudden, seemingly disproportionate wave of anxiety, panic, or even hostility toward their own child.
It's just out of nowhere.
Yes, and it happens precisely when their child reaches the exact age the parent was, when they experience an unmapped, unresolved trauma of their own.
Let me see if I have this right. So, say a father was deeply humiliated or emotionally abandoned by his own parents when he was exactly 4 years old. 30 years later, he might suddenly find himself feeling incredibly hostile, irritable, or competitive with his own 4-year-old son. And he has absolutely no logical idea why. He's just inexplicably angry at a toddler.
That is exactly it. The son simply hitting that specific age acts as an environmental trigger.
Wow.
It detonates the father's unhealed template. The father's mind is violently thrown back to the emotional reality of being a terrified 4-year-old.
But if these echoes are operating completely beneath our conscious awareness, are we just doomed? I mean, it sounds like we are trapped repeating our parents' mistakes in this tragic generational loop that we can't control.
It undeniably feels like a doom loop when you're caught in the middle of it, but the manuscript argues the exact opposite, actually.
Really? How is that not a curse?
Because a developmental echo is a rare psychological opportunity. When that echo detonates, it forces the unprocessed trauma to the surface.
Okay.
But this time, the parent isn't a helpless 4-year-old. They possess the vast resources of an adult mind. They have the capacity for self-observation.
Ah, they can actually look at the panic objectively.
Exactly. If they can recognize the echo happening in real time, if they can pause and say, wait, this intense anger I'm feeling doesn't belong to my child's behavior today, it belongs to my own history, they instantly change the dynamic.
So they shift from blind repetition to informed repetition.
Yes. They catch themselves running the outdated script.
But how does just noticing it actually fix the problem? Does the trauma just vanish?
Well, no, it doesn't vanish overnight. But by repeatedly catching the echo, the parent creates a wage of conscious choice.
They can choose a different reaction.
Right. They can actively choose to respond to their own child in the exact way they desperately wished their parent had responded to them decades ago.
That's incredibly powerful.
And over time, that old, rigid pattern begins to erode simply through the physical wear and tear of accumulating new, healthier experiences. You literally rewrite your internal operating system by feeding it better data.
That is incredibly practical. It means that simple self-awareness, applied in the heat of the moment, actually alters the structure of your mind.
It really does.
Now, as we successfully navigate these echoes and push further into midlife and beyond, our external physical reality inevitably starts to decline.
Hmm.
And the text makes a crucial point about how our internal defenses have to evolve to survive that physical shift.
Yeah, the manuscript draws a hard line between the content of our defense mechanisms and the quality of them.
Content versus quality.
Right. As human beings age, the actual content of how we defend ourselves rarely changes.
So the software program stays the same.
Pretty much. If your primary shield against anxiety at age 20 was intellectualization,
Hmm.
analyzing your emotions from a safe distance instead of actually feeling them, you will almost certainly still rely on intellectualization at age 70.
Okay, so what changes them? The quality.
Exactly. The flexibility of how you apply that defense has to radically change if you want to maintain your sanity. Denial is the perfect example.
Oh, yeah, denial.
When you are 22 years old, denial is practically a superpower. It allows you to take massive, terrifying risks. You can start a business, move across the world, or fall completely in love, entirely because your brain is actively denying the overwhelming statistical probabilities of failure and heartbreak.
It's true. If young people actually processed the real risks of life, no one would ever leave their house. So denial is a very useful shield early on.
Yes.
But I'm guessing that shield becomes a weapon as we get older.
In old age, rigid denial becomes actively self-destructive. If an aging person relies on denial to cope with the reality of their declining physical mobility or the inevitable loss of their peers, they become entirely estranged from reality.
They refuse necessary help, they make dangerous medical decisions, and they isolate themselves.
Exactly. So healthy aging requires the ego to loosen its grip on denial and shift toward a process the text calls anticipatory mourning.
Anticipatory mourning. So mourning a loss before the loss actually happens.
Yes.
How does someone practically do that without just falling into a permanent state of depression?
Well, it isn't about wallowing. It is a highly active process of preparation. Anticipatory mourning is the ego's way of slowly metabolizing the inevitable.
Metabolizing it.
Right. It involves consciously acknowledging that massive losses are coming, the loss of physical independence, the loss of lifelong friends, and ultimately, the loss of one's own life.
By engaging with that reality in small, manageable doses, the person begins the work of detachment gradually.
Exactly. It reinforces the structure of the mind so it isn't completely vaporized when the loss actually hits.
And the manuscript provides a chilling look at what happens when an individual fails to do this preparation, with the clinical case of a patient named Mrs. A.
Right, Mrs. A. She was a 67-year-old woman who came into analysis suffering from profound, completely paralyzing grief following the death of her husband.
Which sounds completely normal at first.
Yes. On the surface, it looked like a normal, albeit very severe, mourning period for a beloved spouse. But the psychoanalytic process revealed a much more complicated internal architecture.
Because she wasn't just grieving a marriage. There was a hidden motive for the intensity of her pain.
Decades earlier, Mrs. A had been a brilliant, highly ambitious young woman with an incredibly promising career in medical research. But at age 30, she abruptly married an older, very established man, and she completely abandoned her career.
Just walked away.
Walked away entirely. Her conscious narrative was that she was simply choosing love over work.
But the unconscious reality was very different.
Very. She was actually terrified of her own aggressive ambition and the fierce competition of the professional world. So she used her husband as what analysts call an auxiliary ego.
Let's break that term down. She essentially outsourced her own strength.
That's exactly it. She took her own capacities for ambition, competence, and worldly success, and she projected them entirely onto him.
So she let him live out those traits on her behalf.
Yes, so she wouldn't have to face the anxiety of wielding them herself. So when her husband suddenly died, she wasn't merely mourning the loss of a romantic partner.
She was mourning the absolute collapse of the psychic structure that held her entire identity together.
Exactly.
And even more tragically, she was mourning the ghost of her own unlived life. I mean, the medical career she walked away from couldn't just be spontaneously regenerated at age 67.
No.
You can't just flip a switch and get 30 years of practice back.
You can't. The analysis couldn't act as a time machine.
Yeah.
It couldn't give her back the capacities she refused to develop.
So what could it do?
Well, what the therapeutic process could do was help her truthfully mourn that specific loss. It helped her understand why she made that bargain at age 30, allowing her to find a limited but entirely genuine peace with the reality of the life she actually lived.
which ties so elegantly into an analogy the text uses regarding how our relationship with our own physical body evolves.
Oh, the U-shaped curve.
Yes. They call it the U-shaped curve of the body ego. It's like the body goes from being a demanding infant to a silent butler and finally to a loud landlord demanding rent.
That is such a vivid way to describe it.
When you are young, you are entirely merged with your physical form. Every hunger pang or scraped knee is an absolute emergency.
You are totally fused with the physical experience.
Right. Then, in adulthood, you master it. Your body becomes the silent butler. It just does what you tell it to do while your mind focuses on careers and relationships.
You experience a slow decline, but you compensate for it.
Exactly. But in old age, you hit the other side of the U-curve. You face the insistence of the body. The landlord is banging on the door, and the physical form demands total submission again.
It dictates what you can eat, when you have to sleep, and how far you can walk.
And for a human ego that has spent half a century priding itself on mastery and total control, that enforced physical submission is psychologically agonizing.
It truly is. And the key to surviving this phase without losing your mind is maintaining what we call the containing function of the ego.
The containing function, what does that look like?
Well, when an infant is hungry, they don't just feel hunger, they are the hunger. They are entirely consumed by the sensation.
Right.
But a psychologically healthy older person who is experiencing chronic arthritis pain has pain. They can mentally observe the pain, place it in the broader context of their day, and maintain a core sense of identity that remains entirely separate from their failing joints.
So they accept the reality of the landlord's demands without letting the landlord completely take over their identity.
Precisely.
As the body insists on slowing down, the mind's focus inevitably turns inward, looking back at the vast expanse of the past. And that introduces the final, and perhaps most difficult, psychological tasks of being human. Managing nostalgia, confronting solitude, and facing the truth of your own life review.
Yeah, nostalgia is a universal human experience, but we rarely analyze its mechanics. The manuscript makes a vital, life-saving distinction between two entirely different types of nostalgia.
Two types.
Yes. The first is restorative nostalgia. This is a purely defensive posture. It is the frantic attempt to literally rebuild or recreate the past.
Why do people do that?
Usually because the individual finds the present too painful, or the irreversible passage of time too terrifying to acknowledge.
Ah, so this is the person who compulsively tries to force their adult children to recreate the exact holiday traditions of their youth?
Yeah.
Or the person who refuses to engage with any modern technology because, society was perfect back in my day.
Exactly.
Hmm.
They are trying to build a time machine out of pure denial.
So what's the second type?
The second is reflective nostalgia. And this one is a sign of profound emotional health. It is actually a form of active mourning.
How does that work?
It is the psychological ability to look back at a beautiful, defining moment in your life, genuinely feel the warmth and joy of that memory, and simultaneously feel the sharp, bittersweet agony that it is gone forever and can never be repeated.
Wow.
You allow yourself to dwell in the uncomfortable gap between what was and what currently is. You don't try to frantically close that gap. You just possess the strength to feel it.
That requires a staggering amount of emotional bravery. To just sit quietly with the finality of time. And the manuscript points out that this becomes exponentially more difficult when the people who originally shared those memories with you start dying off. There is a deeply moving case study regarding a 79-year-old man named Mr. B.
Yes, Mr. B. His wife had recently passed away, but his crushing loneliness went far beyond just missing his spouse. His entire generational cohort was gone.
He was the last one left.
Right. And he was suffering from a phenomenon the text identifies as an epistemic loss. It's a heavy term, but the concept is highly relatable. It basically means losing the witnesses to your life.
Losing the witnesses.
Yeah, because we constantly rely on our peers to validate our reality. If you and I remember the same crazy event from college, your memory confirms that my experience was real.
We anchor each other.
Exactly. For Mr. B, there was literally no one left alive on Earth who remembered the specific street he played on as a child, or the specific battles he fought in during the war.
That is so isolating.
It is. Without that external social validation, he felt his own personal history slipping away into unreality. He felt like he was becoming a ghost.
So, to anchor himself, he spontaneously began writing things down. He wasn't trying to publish a memoir for an audience. He just wrote tiny, hyper-specific Vignettes.
Little details.
Yeah, the exact smell of a bakery from 1950. Or the precise look on his wife's face the morning their first child was born. And the text categorizes these writings as transitional memories.
Right, which operates exactly like a toddler's security blanket.
Yeah.
A physical object that bridges the terrifying gap between the internal mind and the external world.
Mr. B externalized his memories onto paper simply to prove to his own mind that his past actually happened.
It was a beautiful, entirely self-initiated therapeutic act. He was manufacturing a physical witness for his own existence.
And this struggle to validate one's own history brings us to the ultimate developmental goal of old age, a concept originally coined by Erik Erikson as ego integrity.
Yes, but the authors of this manuscript add a vital, brilliant caveat to Erickson's theory.
What's the caveat?
True ego integrity does not come from a favorable life review. It does not require you to look back and conclude that you are a stellar person who made perfect choices.
Oh, thank goodness, because almost no one on Earth actually has a flawless life review.
Right. If you demand that your life review be favorable, you will inevitably end up lying to yourself. You'll be forced to edit out your major failures, justify your cruelties, and bury your deepest regrets.
And maintaining those lies requires a massive, exhausting amount of defensive energy.
Exactly. True ego integrity comes from a truthful life review. It is the austere, completely unvarnished acceptance that you made terrible mistakes, that you suffered deeply, that you caused others to suffer, that you experienced brilliant triumphs, and that you endured humiliating failures.
You just strip away the marketing spin.
Above all, it is the profound acceptance that this was the only life you were ever going to get, lived under historical and psychological conditions you did not fully choose. And yet, it is undeniably yours.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening to this right now? Whether you are 25, navigating midlife at 45, or looking back at 75, your mind is currently running on an operating system built from early invisible templates,
That 3-year-old is still in there.
quietly influencing how you argue with your partner or handle stress at work. The past is fiercely persisting. But the crucial takeaway is that you are not a helpless victim of your psychological history.
No, absolutely not.
Through active self-observation, through catching those developmental echoes before they detonate, and through developing the bravery to sit with the bittersweet reality of time passing, you can move from blind repetition to informed repetition. You can actually rewrite the code.
If there's one central message in the manuscript, it is that the human capacity for change does not have a biological expiration date.
Never too late.
Never. The ego retains the incredible ability to develop, to integrate new data, and to forge meaning right up until the very final moments of life.
And that leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought from the text for you to carry into your day. We live in a highly optimized culture that constantly tells us grief and loss are problems that need to be efficiently solved.
We are told to move on.
Right. We are instructed to process our trauma, achieve closure, and finally just get over it. But the manuscript introduces the radical concept of mourning without resolution.
Mourning without resolution.
What if the ultimate psychological achievement, what we might actually define as true wisdom, isn't about resolving or deleting our grief at all? What if it's the ability to simply carry it?
To let it be there.
To let the heavy awareness of loss serve as a constant, quiet background companion while still remaining fully open, fiercely engaged, and entirely capable of joy in the present moment. Your childhood operating system might have programmed you to run from the pain, but a mature mind knows how to let it run quietly in the background, making the joy in the foreground that much sweeter.